Today we're talking about Boris. How much trouble is the Tory leader and the Prime Minister in after that extraordinary North Shropshire by-election result where the Tories lost to the Lib-Dems in a Leave seat, heavily Leave seat. They suffered a 34% swing away from them towards the Lib-Dems. I'm joined by my colleague Tim Montgomerie. I'm Iain Martin, editor of Reaction. Tim, how bad is it?
Very, very bad. I think, as you said, this is a Leave seat. It's a seat I know reasonably well because of a friendship, if I dare declare it, with Owen Paterson. It's the sort of seat you always expect, as it has done, to vote Conservative. 2 years ago, the Liberal Democrats were promising to rip up Brexit. You would have asked the people of North Shropshire whether they would countenance voting Lib Dem, and they think you were mad. So something very significant has happened to drive the people of North Shropshire, not narrowly, but overwhelmingly, into the hands of the Liberal Democrats. And I was distressed enough at the result, Iain. And then I don't know whether you heard the Prime Minister's interview with Sam Coates of Sky earlier, but he gave the impression that it was the media's preoccupation with things that they shouldn't be reporting that largely explained this problem. Now, if that's his position for the cameras, okay, I don't think it's a very good one, but okay. But if that's really his view in private, we have an even bigger problem than I thought in the early hours this morning.
It's also an updated version of that age-old Tory cry, which actually people used to joke about in the 80s and 90s, which is when they're not getting their message across, which would be what the Tory activists would say usually a few years before some kind of electoral immolation or extinction size event, as though
it was always change the party chairman, wasn't it? When you need to change the party chairman, now it's change the leader's office.
Yes, seems to be. But he that does indicate a level of delusion. If as you say, Tim, Boris Johnson really believes that it's the media's fault, and it's not just as though they didn't lose narrowly. The voters clearly it was a high turnout for a by-election. I think mid to high 40s, 46%. I think. So that's high for a by-election. The voters went about their business in a really ruthless way. That had been suggested that they wouldn't know whether to go Labour or Lib Dem, and it's a Leave seat, which is the easier protest vote. They worked out in large numbers that the way to really to send that message to Westminster to the government was to vote Lib Dem in a Leave seat, and they did it, and it's a majority of more than 5,000. Now, Tim, so you're a Conservative Party animal. You founded Conservative Home, so you've got a great insight into the Tory tribe. A lot of people are asking, and Westminster's abuzz with it, WhatsApp and all the rest of it. How long has he got? Is this going to be the trigger for some kind of leadership event or challenge or contest or resignation, or is that actually some way away, more like the summer or more a year's time, or you might think he can survive it? But how close is all of that?
I hate to do predictions because I've got so many wrong in recent years during our volatile times. The volatility is a point I'd love to come back to before we end. But look, I've spoken to lots of Conservative MPs and players in the last few days, as I know you have. Lots of them have been on the doorstep in North Shropshire. Interestingly, almost overwhelmingly, they found from voters that Boris has become a problem. A massive asset 2 years ago, but lots of different reasons for why he's a problem, but they think he's a problem. And I wouldn't go so far as to say there's a consensus in the parliamentary party that therefore he must go. But there certainly isn't the complacency amongst them that we've just discussed that might be true of Boris. What I do think, though, more than that, though, that should give the Prime Minister comfort, or at least some breathing room as he thinks about rebooting his premiership, is when I ask people the next question, so if you're going to get rid of Boris, who would you have? That's a very, very different sort of set of replies. Some think their candidate's not ready, some have a candidate, some want to stop someone else. And I think the hesitancy about having a leadership race, particularly during a pandemic, might be about to get a lot worse. Yet again, the Tories changing the Prime Minister. I think that is Boris's big advantage. So I hesitate to say what I'm about to say, but I would be very surprised to see any move against him in the next 3 months. I wouldn't go much beyond that, but I think he has time, unless he, for example, has lied to Parliament about the Christmas parties, etc. I hope he hasn't. It would take something like that to move the things along more quickly. Does that chime with what you're hearing?
Yeah, I think so. Or the resignation of Lord Geit, the independent advisor on ministerial standards, who is reportedly furious about being misled and having compiled his report, which was cast as a whitewash by some people, but compiled his report in good faith, and then it emerges that Boris Johnson had been, in one form or another, seeking donations. This is for the renovation of the flat. So there's that to play out. Plus, I would just say there is an emergency on at the moment with the Omicron thing. We're going to know as a country in 10 days to 2 weeks the seriousness of that, because we're a laboratory, really, just because it's here, it's spread so fast. Plus, the monitoring is particularly good in the UK. And so we'll know in 2 weeks how that plays out. But also, you're going into a cold winter. Look at the price of electricity. Forward pricing on electricity has gone through the roof. So there are all sorts of things that could go wrong in the next 2, 3, 4 weeks. So that would just be my caveat. If you get some kind of there's about to be there'll obviously be a surge in demand for electricity. Christmas coming. Stress and strain through isolating on the supermarket supply chain network. So there's all of that in play in the next month. But I think it feels to me as though they have, chatting to a lot of people, it's decided that his race is run. I would be astonished. I have long thought this. I'd be astonished if he does actually fight the next general election. He may disagree and fight on, but it feels as though it's the beginning of the end. And the question is how long that process takes. Whether it takes, as you say, I think you're right. It's more like beyond 3 or 4 months. I would say one thing though about them not knowing who the next leader is, and a few Tories have said that to me at Westminster this week when I popped into the Commons. But in a way, they never know. I mean, it's never entirely clear. People now look back with hindsight and say, well, it was always going to be Boris Johnson, which, of course, it probably was once it got to the members. But there were 4 or 5 rounds of voting. The parliamentary party did its best to stop him. So it was moot, or it was up in the air.
The Tory party famously, the favourite rarely wins.
Yep,
has done more recently. So I still think, though, that there is a basic concern, and this is a good concern in the parliamentary party, that they have to get it right. I think the seriousness of the Conservative position at the moment is, I think we're the good guys in politics. Lots of Labour people think they're the good guys. But where we have succeeded as a party over the years and to been as successful as we have been is that we're a party of competence. We get things done.
That's the theory. Yeah.
And of course, at the moment, we're getting everything wrong. We're U-turning. There's no serious policy thinking. We don't look like the grown-ups. And so I think it's very important that the Conservative Party has a couple of years under a new leader to begin to repair that essential core brand identity that the Conservative Party has. And so I think, and I'm glad that there is a sort of a seriousness amongst a lot of the Conservative MPs. This isn't just about fighting the next general election. This is about restoring the Tory brand. This is about having good government again. And they can't afford to make another mistake. So that caution is a
Yeah,
good one.
yeah. If they get it wrong, and we'll come to the contenders in a moment, if there is going to be a leadership contest at some point.
I could not foresee the circumstances, Iain, in which I would put my name forward.
They've got to get it right. They cannot get themselves into a situation where the Tory tribe removes Boris Johnson, who 2 years ago won a majority of 80. Yes, of course, it was partly Corbyn and all the rest of it, but it was a bit. Some of it was down to his peculiar appeal and ability to reach different kind of voters. So they can't 2 years after that remove him and then replace him with someone that very quickly goes wrong or becomes massively unpopular with the voters. That which leads me to the first candidate, who I wrote a piece the other day for Reaction in my weekly members email, which you can subscribe to below if you become a member of Reaction, in which I said that Liz Truss was the front runner, which I got a lot of pushback on that. I was surprised by it and surprised by how worried quite a lot of Tories were by that idea. But if you look at the Conservative Home poll, the activist poll, which is, to me, has always been a gold standard in British political politics. Yes, it's self-selecting. It's always caught the big ebb and flow of opinion and the direction of travel in the Tory tribe. And Boris Johnson is second from bottom and has been low for a while now. And Liz Truss tops the poll at plus 82. This is the Tory tribe indicating that she's the front runner. But I have been really surprised, as I said, by the amount of pushback from people, and people really worried. Some people who I thought would automatically support her on the basis that she's a kind of Thatcherite. She's in favour of public sector reform. She's pretty
good
tough.
on equalities.
Yeah, she's pretty tough. She doesn't let criticism get to her, so she knows what she's about in politics. But she's also, the latest YouGov survey I noticed the other day shows that I think on recognisability, only 50% of the public have heard of her. So most people haven't heard of her. So there's the question that Tory activists, donors, other members of the Tory tribe that they'll be worrying about is just if you end up with Liz Truss and it doesn't work with the public, and the public is introduced to a new Tory leader and her media appearances are seen as awkward or somehow lack empathy or just don't connect, then you've gone from Boris to Liz Truss, and you're because you can't then change leader again. I don't think so. So as you said, it has to be got right. Do you think my analysis of the situation and their view of Liz Truss is broadly correct, Tim?
Spot on. I'm afraid viewers aren't going to get much of a difference between us on this one. I like Liz a lot. I've known her for a number of years, but I'm not sure in a way that she connects with members, she will connect with the public. So there's quite an ideological side to her. I'm not entirely, I know she's got seen to have done well at trade and things. People who know trade deals tell me actually it isn't that good a deal that Britain has struck. I certainly have heard that from people in Australia. When she was Chief Secretary to the Treasury, there was a lot of unhappiness within the Treasury that she didn't really do her boxes in the way that ministers should. That, of course, is not how Mrs. Thatcher behaved. She was incredibly scrupulous with all of that. And so I think there's a big public sales going on with Liz Truss, but I don't see the substance from her. And it may be proven over time. She can confound people like me. But I certainly am not ready at the moment to press a button that would make Liz Truss Prime Minister without an awful lot more evidence. And that's essential at the moment. We've got challenging times as a country. we can't afford to have someone who isn't half proven as our next Prime Minister if we do get rid of Boris Johnson. And I'm afraid Liz definitely falls into the unproven category for me.
But it's going to be, so should explain to people what the process is, just to remind them. I do get, people are very used to Tory leadership elections. They cut like buses. There'll be another one along in a moment. But the process is that MPs, remember, whittle the contenders down, with contenders being knocked out in each round. And that's MPs voting. And then the final two, last time it was Jeremy Hunt and Boris Johnson, go out to the Tory members who all get a vote. I do think that the point that you make, Tim, about the choice that they face and having to get it right, that underlines that this is a contest when it comes, which is going to rely even more than usual on that sort of focus grouping. And I'm thinking of televised focus groups of the kind that were very influential in 2005 when David Cameron beat David Davis for the leadership. The floating voter, or the conservative inclined but disgruntled voter, if you give them footage of Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak, other contenders, and measure it, and you pick up in that room that sense of sentiment, that looks like a sensible person, that person looks like the future. I find that figure a little too harsh. That can then, it catches fire in the media, and it takes hold among activists and members as well, and influences their thinking. So for Liz Truss to confound people, she's going to have to pass that test, so that those groups on BBC Newsnight or Sky News or whatever, see people watch this and think, that's not what I expected from that figure. That's not the persona. That's someone that they can warm to, or certainly think is the answer. Which brings me to Rishi Sunak, because on that basis, and looking at his polling, even though it slipped because of the mess he's got into on taxation policy and various other things, his polling with Tory activists, but then also his sort of general popularity, I think, has taken a bit of a knock. He does fit that bill, doesn't he? He is, and I'm thinking about writing the newsletter for Reaction members this weekend on what is it, just examining, interrogating that question, what is the case for Rishi Sunak? Because I have major concerns about the stuff that he's done on tax and the way in which he's handled things since the spring in terms of the economy. The corporation tax rise, which is a ridiculous idea, hiking national insurance. I think that's his problem. His weakness is, well, you've been Chancellor, and you're the tax raising Chancellor. I don't think he has I don't think he would have a problem convincing those focus groups that I described that he's a solid individual. He has some, whether it's charisma, he has something, doesn't he? And he has an extraordinary backstory.
Yeah, no, he's held one of the great offices of state during a major crisis. He's been a source of reassurance. And I think that, look, there's two things. There's the politics of this. And obviously the Conservative Party wants someone who can win the next election. And I think after Boris Johnson, reassurance, seriousness is going to be absolutely essential. And that's, I think, the advantage of the Chancellor. But there's another thing. I actually think there's a very good chance, even if Boris stays, that the Tories can win the next general election. I think there are fundamental weaknesses in Labour's position. I think there's various culture war issues that will play to the Tory party's advantage. I think Labour is fundamentally divided still. The Corbynistas have largely been shut out of the front bench. I think the Tories can easily run good scare stories about what kind of Labour governments with the Corbyn wing holding the balance. My largest sort of problem really is it's an old-fashioned idea, Iain, but I actually like to be in office and do something.
Crazy idea. It's never going to catch on.
But it's one of the reasons I'm particularly nervous about this midterm unpopularity is when Mrs. Thatcher and most governments, Blair, experienced midterm popularity, it was because they'd undertaken difficult reforms.
True.
They passed difficult legislation. The vested interests were, up in arms, but they knew that the legislation would produce dividends by the time of the election. We are having midterm blues now, not because we've done difficult things, but just because there's the smell about us ethically. There's an incompetence. There's just sort of an amateurishness about how we are. How often do we get a majority of 80, a solid parliamentary majority where we could improve the country, do some important things, tax simplification, education reform, the sort of thing. So my bigger question about Rishi Sunak isn't, can he win us an election? I think he's probably better placed than Liz Truss. Is you haven't really done anything so far with your budgets. Okay, there's been a pandemic. What you spent a lot of money, but the missing thing is reform. What do you want to do with power? And if there is a leadership election in which he was a leading player, a contender, that's what I would want to know from him. Are you going to be someone who continues to fritter away this majority? Are you going to do something? Because finally, then I'll shut up.
Not at all.
That is the thing that strikes me most about the huge electoral earthquake we've witnessed in North Shropshire overnight. And we can all look at specific factors, but political earthquakes keep happening. People voted for Brexit. They voted in large numbers for Jeremy Corbyn. They voted for Trump. They've just in Virginia voted out the Democrats by a huge number, just a year after putting Biden in. Voters are still unhappy with the status quo. They are more volatile than ever. They are wanting their politicians to do something. And 2 years ago, yes, the Tories did well. But I think we made a mistake. Sorry, I keep saying we, but I am a conservative.
Well, you are. Yes, you are. Yeah. I say they, and you say we. That's fine. That's a good deal.
But I think the Tories, and Boris Johnson probably particularly guilty of this, read that huge result as an affirmation of them, us. Actually, I think it was an affirmation of getting a vehicle for change, Brexit, done. And I think it's still part of the same trend we've been seeing now for 5-10 years in the world since the crash. Voters are struggling on a whole range of fronts, and they are going to support almost any vehicle in large numbers that will deliver change. And this government, whether it's levelling up or whatever, isn't actually really delivering change. And I don't think the pandemic is enough of an excuse, because I don't think they had an agenda before the pandemic on levelling up, and they've had 2 years to work on it privately, and they still haven't got one.
I mean,
So
lots of
Rishi, what's the beef in your burger?
Yeah, really, really good analysis, and also lots of people voted. I know plenty of them who voted for Boris Johnson and the Tories last time, almost 2 years, or just over 2 years ago, not because of they loved Boris or thought he was a cuddly, amusing character or loved the way in which he annoys the media and all the rest of it. They voted out of fear of Corbyn, because Corbyn had come worryingly close in 2017. He didn't almost win the election, but he removed the Tory majority. And also just after 3 years or so of just horrible politics. And most people don't think about politics very much. That's not an insult. They're getting on with their lives, and they think about politics around when they're asked to, around the time of elections. And then I think a lot of people do think about it deeply and take it seriously as a patriotic duty to engage. But between elections, they tend not to. What was so horrible about the Brexit period was that, thanks to the incompetence of Brexiteers, our fellow Brexiteers, the incompetence of the government, the ghastliness of Parliament, and the rise and emergence of people like John Bercow, the Speaker, and the attempt to stop Brexit, it meant that politics was on constantly and was much more front and centre in terms of the news, in terms of mainstream radio discussions or things like the Jeremy Vine thing. I think a lot of people resented that. They were being forced to think about something which they don't naturally like thinking about, and they had to think about it non-stop, and it was nationally a bit embarrassing. So here was an opportunity to say...
There's even too much politics for someone like me who's a
same here. Same here. Almost put me off politics. And here was a chance to say, enough. Maybe Brexit is a mistake. Maybe it's the right thing to do. But just get beyond this thing and shut up. Just stop this debate and move on. And that then happened successfully. I do agree with you on the Labour question, in that they have some really serious structural weaknesses, not least of which is Scotland, where if Labour's to get to a proper majority, rather than going into a campaign with the Tories being able to say, like 2015, it's going to be a coalition with Nicola Sturgeon and the Greens. And so what are you, if you vote Labour, who are you really voting for? What will you get at the end of the process? It's sort of pig in a poke Tory campaign, which you can then imagine being successful. To negate that, the Labour need to win a serious number of seats back in Scotland, and there's no sign, despite the fact they've got a very good leader in Anna Sawar, there's no sign of that happening. Where I do think Labour are making real progress, and maybe it's not election-winning progress, but it does alter the rules of the game at the moment, is that I've been very, very impressed. I said it on Politics Live, the Beeb this week, been very impressed since the reshuffle with the way in which certain people like Rachel Reeves and Wes Streeting are now, their Labour is back playing proper mainstream politics aimed at the mainstream. And you'll notice her statement yesterday where Sunak is in California, nothing wrong with that. I think he's at various meetings and I don't know quite what he's doing. But she was out there saying that he was letting down great British businesses. So there's the patriotic soundbite. And what was he going to do to help them? He better get himself back from California. Streeting was very good in the Commons this week. And they're back at the races, employing basic but sophisticated and clever new Labour style messaging and attack messaging, which the Tories haven't had to deal with for 6 years, arguably even longer if you include the Miliband years. So I'm not saying Labour is back, but you can see things sort of starting to fall into place in their operation, and the Tories won't, I think, in the next few years be able to just rely on Labour being terrible. Those Starmeries, don't you think, Tim, just has a problem with? I know people won't necessarily vote on Brexit, but for a certain kind of voter in a Leave seat, Starmer's always going to be the guy that tried to make Jeremy Corbyn Prime Minister and tried to stop Brexit.
Well, I think that, and it's one of the reasons why I think one of the cards the party will play potentially quite potently at the next election against him. But just to add a sort of argue against myself partly, Ed Davey, I was not convinced, let's just say, that he was going to be a great Liberal Democrat leader. He's a pretty ordinary guy like you, older white guy. We're very unfashionable types, aren't we? And not the most charismatic person, I'm sure he would say.
I can't believe it. I'm like Ed Davey. Not the most charismatic person, pretty ordinary. I would like to distance myself from Ed Davey. Nice man though he is, I would like to distance myself.
This will be my last video for I think I'm about to be sacked. But the point I'm getting to rather clumsily is that if you're basically okay and competent, you run a reasonable ship, and you've just given a couple of examples of why Labour is beginning to run a reasonable ship, and the electorate has had enough of the government, that's perhaps all that you need to do. Obviously, Liberal Democrats aren't going to win, the kind of swing that they've won in these by-elections. But what happened? We're old enough, because we are these old, uncharismatic white men here, and we're old enough to remember what happened in 1997.
Yeah,
the Tories were low then. Liberal Democrats won over 50 seats, where they were seen as the principal get the Tory out, vehicle, and that is what really is going to mean that Boris may have a little lifeline, but he is in big trouble, because if voters are now willing to vote Labour or Liberal Democrat to get the Tories out, not having a Blair or a Ashdown in charge, but basically it's just someone who's up to it, that should worry the Tories.
But here's the case then why not to wait. If the opposition parties, and the case for why the Tories shouldn't wait. So if they're facing a situation where the opposition parties are starting to get their act together, so Liberal Democrats are back doing what they do best, which is get people on the ground and fight by-elections.
Saying one thing to one part.
Precisely. Posing as being really sanctimonious and pious and actually committing the most extraordinary, egregious rhetorical acts on the ground and winning by-elections, all the rest of it. So that the Liberals are doing that. Labour are starting to professionalise themselves. The Corbyn years are over. The real problem, surely, for the Tories is that if at the heart of the North Shropshire result is a judgment about character, morality, ethics, not a county just north of London, but ethics and behaviour and standards, just this sense that the leadership class or the governing class is at it. And if Boris embodies that, then the danger for the Tories and for other contenders, those who've chosen to serve with him, is that they end up tainted by Boris Johnson. Does that then not suit an outsider? So we've talked about someone who's not in the cabinet. So we've talked about Rishi Sunak, Liz Hunt as the front runner, which is
Liz
sometimes
Truss.
not good. Liz Truss as the front runner. We haven't talked about Jeremy Hunt, who decided not to serve and is outside the cabinet. Maybe Tom Tugendhat as a younger MP would take a run at it and is untainted by association with Boris.
I noticed the Times mentioning Nadhim Zahawi as well,
Yep.
which I think is an interesting possibility. Certainly very popular with voters. Maybe I'm being complacent myself, but I think most of it, this almost isn't a government. This is it's like a Boris phenomenon. You know, he actually dominates this government. I think a lot of the problems really do centre around him. The Chancellor doesn't really have ethics questions dogging him. The government there's certainly been individual ministers who've not played up to the highest standards. But no, I don't think it's too late to separate the Conservative Party from Boris Johnson. I think if Boris Johnson stays in office for much longer and continues to behave as he has done, he will fundamentally damage the Tory brand. He has either to go or he has to, improve his act. But just at the moment, with 2-3 years left on the electoral clock, I think a new leader has the opportunity to govern in a different way and rescue the Conservative Party's reputation.
Tim Montgomerie, thank you very much for joining me. We were going to talk for about sort of 10 or 15 minutes about the aftermath of North Shropshire. We've talked for about half an hour, and it's been so interesting getting your perspective. And next year, 2022, is going to be another gripping year in politics, and hopefully we'll talk more early next year. If you're not a subscriber to Reaction and you want to become a member of Reaction, go to the address below and sign up, and you get my weekly email on politics for members of Reaction, and you also get all of the writing from the team, and Tim Marshall on geopolitics, Maggie Pagano on business, and lots more besides. If you're not a subscriber on YouTube, just click the subscribe button below and get more of these videos and podcasts from the team at Reaction. Until next time, Tim, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.